Oh, okay. Well, welcome. We're here in sunny Kohav Yaakov. Uh, Thank you for joining us. And good morning for those of you on the West Coast. Good afternoon for those of you joining us on the East Coast. This week is Parashat Tazria-Metzora. Just to date the video, last week we heard there was news of breakthrough in coalition negotiations here in Israel. And since then, nothing much has happened. Kind of funny. I don't believe anything much will happen, but we'll see. Who could have predicted we'd be in the situation that it's now been? Sorry about that. It's now been months since we last had access to a decent studio, let alone a base medrash in which to do this. So I apologize if, even if I can escape the children and find a decent place, bandwidth to record, if the neighbors are going to be making noise, I can't control them, and we'll just have to do with what we have. I considered setting up somewhere else, but I didn't know they were going to do this, so maybe next week we'll try the other side of the house. Anyways, this week we read about a concept that's going to be recurring in the Torah. Let's just a little bit for a second. The concept of impurity and purification, and that is that anybody who wants to purify himself from an extreme or a major form of contamination has to count 7 days. 7 days is the normal period for decontamination. The most basic forms of impurity can be removed by immersion in a mikvah, a ritual area, and then that person just has to wait for the end of the day, and the purification is complete. But for major forms of impurification, of contamination, for example, tzara'at, we're going to read about the impurities that women get for menstruation and childbirth, and person with gonorrhea, and tumat met, the contamination from contact with the dead. Those all take periods of 7 days to remove. As we saw years ago, that's the essence of the Sfirat HaOmer, that the sages commanded us, or the sages pointed out, that the Torah commands that we count both days and weeks. We first count a full 7 days, and we say, okay, now 1 week is up, and now we'll do this again, because we have one major national act of purification with the approaching holiday of Shavuot. I wrote to someone, a Rav that I had met before, that asked a question concerning the celebration of Sfirat HaOmer. Sfirat HaOmer is supposed to be a happy time. And unfortunately, customs developed among Jewish people to mark the death of Rabbi Akiva's students during this time. Although the Talmud mentions that they did die at this time, and we've spoken about how it's not quite clear what exactly killed them. The practice of mourning, in practice, that is, perhaps people would not get married, they wouldn't listen to music, that's a very late custom. They would cut their hair during this time. Those are all practices that developed organically among the Jewish people, quite late in history, not mentioned in the Talmud. And I was pointing out that a biblical view of Sfirat HaOmer is entirely differently. Like the Ramban says, if you think about it, Sfirat HaOmer is one long Chol Moed between Pesach and Shavuot. What does he mean by that? Well, Chol Moed, what does it mean to Chazal? They're the ones who called it Chol HaMoed. The Torah didn't give a name. The Torah just called them the festivals of Matzot and the festivals of Sukkot, the objects of the festival. On the festival of Matzot, we eat matzahs, and on the festival of Sukkot, we dwell in Sukkot. And those are named the holidays. The first and last day of each of those festivals is a Mikra Kodesh, and a day where you can't do Malacha. And then there's the intervening days, which is implied that those are not Mikra Kodesh, those are weekdays. That's what Chazal called it. Chol means weekday, HaMoed, but it's the appointed time. The appointed time it's in the Torah. And Chazal said that it's similar in holiness to that of Rosh Chodesh, which we're celebrating tonight and tomorrow. Rosh Chodesh is a weekday. There's nothing prohibited on Rosh Chodesh necessarily, although Chazal came and prohibited things on Chol Moed, taking the Rambam's approach in this regard. There is this contradiction between Chol and Moed, and Chazal says Moed is an appointed time, and therefore a person should honor, go out of his way to mark the occasion by wearing nicer clothing and eating nicer food. Whatever mitzvah there is of rejoicing applies also in Chol Moed. Chol Moed is also a time in the temple where they bring an additional sacrifice, just like they bring on the other days of the festival. So in the temple it was just as much a festival. So that's what Chol Moed means. So when the Ramban is saying it's a Chol Moed, it means that yes, these are weekdays. Sfirat Omer is a weekday, that nothing's prohibited otherwise. We go about our business, and there's no special mitzvah we can accomplish. But in the temple, they're gearing up for a special korban. There was a korban brought on the first day, Chol Moed, to mark the beginning of the Omer. That's the Omer. It was barley. And we're building up to the end of the harvest season when instead of barley, we're going to bring wheat, which is a superior grain. And that wheat is not going to be just a plain flour. It's going to be made into bread, not just ordinary bread that was brought in the temple, which was unleavened, but actual leavened bread, which is considered superior. That is what we're building up to. That is the Chol Moed of Sfirat Omer. We're getting somewhere. We are undergoing 7 times a period of national purification leading up to this holiday. And although I'm not into Chassidut that much, this does say a lot. This is basically saying that the hachana, the preparation for the mitzvah, that is the ikar. That is what Chol Moed, that's what Sfirat Omer is supposed to be from a biblical standpoint. Why is this important? Because there's much chatter most years. I was seeing now among the Israeli rabbis are discussing this heterim. There's permissibilities for haircuts, etc. Many of us know that sphere beards is a yeshiva guy thing. Not everybody does it. Certainly, there's a tradition in Lithuanian yeshivas based on the teachings of the Gaon of Vilna that every Friday one can, for example, groom himself. And if shaving is how he grooms himself, on the assumption that shaving is permissible, or any other form of grooming, we consider trimming the beard or trimming it shaving entirely in a permissible manner if it is permissible, and cutting the hair to be all one halacha. Just like every Friday, one is supposed to honor the Sabbath by preparing his clothing. He's supposed to wear nicer, cleaner clothing. He's supposed to bathe himself, and all that he does in preparation for the Sabbath is considered a good thing. It is something he's supposed to do, and a person is supposed to go out of his way to prepare for the Sabbath. So too, just like bathing, he can groom himself, and there is no problem. Every Friday of the week, except the Friday Chol Moed, where perhaps he should have, let's say Yom Tov was Thursday, he should have cut his hair and groomed himself on Wednesday in preparation for Yom Tov. And if he didn't prepare himself for Yom Tov and said, I'll just do it on Chol Moed Friday, then the sages imposed a penalty on him and forbade him to do that. Same with doing his laundry. He said, I won't prepare my clean clothes Erev Yom Tov, I'll wait for Friday Chol Moed, then the sages penalized him. He cannot do that. They're unaware of these things. And if one looks at certain other halachic sources, certainly Achronim, 20th century poskim, decisors, and also the Israeli ones nowadays, many fail to take this idea into account. To them, the morning of Sfirat Omer is part of the calendar. That's what it is. We're not going to get over that. And I'd like to challenge this assumption. First of all, Sfirat Omer is not supposed to be one of morning. 2, whatever minhagim have developed, fine, you can observe those on the weekdays, but on Fridays, getting ready for Shabbos, they have no place. Organic minhagim of sadness during this time of the year is not, it's, I guess you could do that, but when it comes to the mitzvah, the biblical commandment to honor the Sabbath, Sabbath wins. Sabbath always wins. That has to be. More importantly, the Rambam says, someone asked me this one as a follow-up 2 weeks ago. Someone asked, well, isn't it, it's pretty tragic Rabbi Akiva's students died. Yes, it's very important. The Rambam says that when regards to someone who dies, even important people, it's important to mark their passing. That's why we have Shiva, we have the 7 days of mourning, then we have the Shloshim, and for parents we even have an additional year thereof. But then he says, mourning excessively, deciding a year later to reawaken the feelings of grief, etc., from someone who's passed in this world is entirely inappropriate. There is no precedent in the Talmudic corpus for establishing such a long period of mourning for any person or persons on an annual basis, even for one's parents. There's no such thing as mourning the year after, unless God forbid someone has to move graves, etc. But that's only for one day, and it doesn't become a permanent day on the calendar. The idea of a yahrzeit, for example, is saying it's much later in Jewish history. It's not something that the sages of the Talmud or the Mishnah, it's not something with which they were familiar. Therefore, it doesn't seem appropriate to do such a thing. But more than that, as I told to some people 2 weeks ago, even if one were to make all these assumptions, the fact is that God has brought about in history that we've finally gotten over what went wrong apparently during Sfirat Omer. Just like it is fairly obvious that one day in history we will no longer have the 4 fast days that we observe due to the destruction of the temple, which is worth mourning every year because every year it is not rebuilt as though it has been destroyed. It's not like it's not like we're mourning constantly for someone who passed away. So Tisha B'Av, unfortunately, we've observed it in the past years, but we also know that this year, God willing, we're not preparing anymore to observe Shiva Asar B'Tammuz. We're not preparing to observe Tisha B'Av. On my calendar, those don't exist, and if Chas v'Shalom it does come about, it'll be pretty unfortunate. But we do not prepare for those things, just like we do not prepare to sit Shiva. And we know that, God willing, we'll rebuild the temple, things will be better, and then those holidays will be, as the prophet said, or as the prophet ordered us, those will be holidays. What about Sfirat Omer? It's much longer, and there doesn't seem to be a built-in escape from these organic minhagim. And I believe God has brought it about that the holiday we're going to observe next week, Israeli Independence Day, and the one 3 weeks after that, Yom Yerushalayim, were specifically brought about during the time of Sfirat Omer. One during the first half when everybody's not getting hurt. The other one, some people continue whatever it is, their Omer observance, their observance of mourning during the Omer, even after Lag BaOmer. God brought about these 2 days at this time of year to show us that this time is supposed to be happy. But more than that, these 2 days are the solution to whatever went wrong with Sfirat Omer. What went wrong with Sfirat Omer? The Bar Kokhba revolt was an attempt to gain Jewish independence from the Roman occupiers, the Roman Empire occupiers during the 2nd century. And Rabbi Akiva's students were killed in those battles, and that's what led to this. Certainly, when the Jewish people get together and finally throw off the yoke of foreign oppression, the British at the time were the successors to the Roman Empire. When now it's the American Empire is their successor. The British at the time were the Roman successors, and getting rid of their accursed presence in the Holy Land and establishing the state of Israel was the success that Rabbi Akiva and his students were looking for. In that regard, we failed to build the temple. God willing, we'll get that part also very soon. And Yom Yerushalayim, even more so, that was supposed to be the beginning of the building of the temple. God willing, this year it'll be the day of the completion of building the temple. That shows us that we have gotten over these things and we should move on now. I think people should definitely reconsider this. I don't know personally what it is that I observe as part of mourning in Sfirat Omer. I don't think it's healthy. I think that it's time to move on. I implore, just like I've been showing Israeli rabbinical colleagues, there's much room, for example, not just tomorrow, but next week also, and the week after that, to groom oneself in honor of the Sabbath. That's what our Rabbanim believed. That's what halacha should be. That's what the Vilna Gaon would have believed. It's hard to convince them, but we're trying. I'd like to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom, Shabbos. Stay healthy, stay safe, and God willing, you'll all be able to join us here in the land of Israel soon. This should serve as a wake-up call for everybody who has yet to seriously consider their Aliyah. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and send in your questions and comments, and that'll be it.